Okay, so the exercise at hand that we're doing with the class is a single MVC app with multiple pages solving different problems. The first problem we're solving is miles per gallon that we've kind of already started on down that journey. And then the next one is solving the BMI calculator. And so where we're at currently is we have a home controller, which is just our landing page. So when we launch, it's just our landing page. But then we went ahead and created another controller called the MPG controller. So I'm going to close all the files, close all tabs, and I'm just going to open up the MPG controller. I'm going to open up the MPG model, and inside of a folder called MPG, I have an MPG view called index that matches the name of the index method inside of our controller. And so let's put the model first, then we'll put the view, and then we'll put the controller. So 3 tabs open, and we're kind of solving this problem. Honestly, I started going down a path of using some regular properties, and now that I'm looking back at what I've done, I could probably just should have done the auto implemented properties. I think those would have worked for our purpose here. We have this method called calcmpg that returns the answer, essentially, what we're looking for. I did want to ultimately, say that if you have business logic, it goes in the MPG in the model, and so a lot of times we'll find ourselves writing business logic in the model. So our if statements and our for loops and those kinds of things, we don't need it for this problem, so I'm not going to introduce it. But in these methods, you would write your if statements and for loops if necessary. And where I kind of left off is I was making this form with labels and whatnot. So let's go ahead and build in a label. ASP4, and this should bring in our property. Since it's a strongly typed view, our MPGs have either gallons used or miles driven. So this is a label for miles driven. Miles driven, we'll add some bootstrap classes. Form label, and an input ASP4, and this will be miles driven. Classes form control. And because miles driven is coming in as 0, when we're just loading the page, that value should be 0 when the page loads. Div class of row, div class of call. We could just have 3 kind of equal calls, call, and put all of this kind of just in the middle, if you will, the middle column. And to get those on different lines, we'll just add in a block level div. And then copy paste and make a couple of changes for gallons used. Change miles driven to gallons used. And see what breaks. Okay, MPG, miles driven, gallons used. I believe it should have. Oh no, here's what we need to get the number 0 in there. We need to use that razor syntax. So there's a value where we can bring in view bag dot what do we call it? Miles driven. View bag dot miles driven, and value equals view bag dot gallons used. And these are going to be numbers, so probably yes. Good eye. We'll bring in a toString, and toString makes sense. Now we got zeros loading up in our GET request. Last thing we need is a submit button, and that should take us to our index method that is a post on our controller of the MPG controller, button type of button, button type of submit, class of button, button primary, submit. And that will get us to the point, our MPG controller, into this method right here. Where we can calculate the view bag dot MPG equals drive stats dot, and we should have our method calc MPG right there. And the user's already changed the miles driven and the gallons used, so I don't think we need to load up our view bag with these two properties. Instead, I think all that's needed is this MPG. Let's put the answer view bag MPG inside of this call. Output tag, class of form, class of text success at view bag dot MPG toString. And this is kind of also the point where we started making all of our data types nullable. And so let's do that. Okay, so our fields are nullable and our return data types are nullable. And I'm thinking I need to put the MPG at 0 right here off the top, but maybe not. Let's just run it without. Yeah, it's not happy with my MPG, so I'm going to go ahead and 0 that out. View bag.mpg is 0. And so there's 103. Okay, so cannot perform runtime binding on a null reference. Miles driven toString. I saw this earlier. It's barking at miles driven. And I want to do these auto-implemented property. Oh, I know what it is. I didn't need to. Let me undo. Control Z. I think double MPG equals miles driven divided by gallons used. I had to do this the other day, and then just return MPG. Reboot. There we go. MPG. That's not my problem. Miles driven. Cannot perform runtime binding on a null reference. I'm going to put in a breakpoint on my controller right here. See if that hits. So now instead of starting without debugging, I'm going to start with debugging. Let me close that down. Start with debugging. $103. Okay. So drive stats, let's see if it's got the data. 3 gallons used, 100 miles driven. This is good. And when I go down, that appears to work. View bag MPG is 33 and some change. So that's exactly what you want. Let's continue to step into. All right, let me clean this up because I think this goes back to my model. And my first thing, I'm going to just take these nullables off because it is barking about a nullable type and maybe I don't need them. So let me boot that up. MPG. Okay, so what that tells me I want to do next is make these auto-implemented. Okay. No errors there. MPG 103. Okay. Let me troubleshoot this off of camera. Okay, so my bug was that in the post, I did not set my miles driven or my gallons used. And so I just set them to whatever the user typed, which comes in my drive stats object. So that was my bug. I want to solve another problem with an if statement. And so I don't know, going back, if BMI really We'll see what the CDC says about BMI. Is their weight in pounds divided by the square? So it's not really if this, else that.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, what you could do is you could do like underweight. If this weight, then
Oh,
out underweight.
That's right.
If else.
Okay, that's not a bad idea. We could just we could assign the categories.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll assign the various text categories to the different categories.
I think I remember doing that at one point.
Yeah. And so BMI categories. Okay, this is. By the way, I always think this is funny because like the first thing I learned about BMI when I was like 15 is like it's not a good thing because you look at someone who's clearly physically fit like The Rock, right, Dwayne Johnson, and he's definitely 30 or higher because he's so muscular and that's heavy, right? So, anyways, not the important thing here. So that's solving one problem, but now we just want another page. And so this is the MPG controller. Let's start now by adding a controller. And right now everything's empty. We'll call this BMI controller. Later on we start using some of those other tools that you might be seeing there. So this is on the get. So we now have a BMI controller. Let's create a BMI view. Add a view. We need a folder. Right click, add folder called BMI. If I can type, that would be a good thing. And now let's add, right click, add a view. Let's name it properly this time, which is index. And let's add a controller, which is a class, a model, which is a class called BMI. Okay, so let's start with the model first, then the view, then the controller. In our view, class of text, okay, so now on our layout page, which is under underscore layout, we need an anchor tag. Instead of the href attribute, we code ASP controller, BMI controller, ASP action, index method. There we go. There we go. Okay. That was just the one thing I definitely wanted to show is, hey, how to get multiple problems on the same solution using this. It's also worth noting, like, look at our URLs. This is the controller / index is kind of automatic. So this is the action. So if you have /mpg / anything else, well, that's just the method. But you get that for free if you use the index method.
So can you go through one more time, just the linking to different pages?
Yeah. So the controller is it's either home or BMI or MPG. You just leave the word controller off of there. So when you're referring to the controller, is that, and then what method in the controller do you want to handle the get request? In this case, the index is the action. You know, but like very very soon, you know, like we might have in a controller for student, you might have a list action that is a list of all your students.
Yeah.
And so it would be, if you were thinking about the URL for that, the route, it would be the student controller / list method would be the route. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Yeah, and then all the views are stored in their own like MPG folder.
In their own folders, which just match up with the name of their controller.
Okay, cool.
So you just leave out the word off controller there as well.
Yeah, that's all good.
So private string category is going to be your text description. And then private double your BMI is going to be what we actually, the number that we calculate. BMI is based on a user's weight and height. So private double weight, private double height. And this is definitely not auto-implemented properties because it's more complex than that. Because we're going to have like, if the BMI is this category or this range, then set the underscore category, so on and so forth. But I do think height and weight, no, because anytime you change the weight, you also have to change, or the height, you have to change the BMI. So I'm not thinking we can do anything shorthand here. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but let's just start public double weight. Return the weight, set the weight equals to the value, and again, we're going to call this calc BMI here. Another one for height. Return the height. Underscore height equals value. Let's stop this from running real quick. Public double calc BMI. And what we'll do is we'll set it and we'll return it. So underscore BMI equals, and whatever that calculation is, a weight divided by the square of height. So weight divided by underscore height times height. We're going to return BMI. What am I? Double calc BMI is a method. That's why it's not happy. And when we calc BMI, we also need to set the category. But let's make another method for category. Public string, call it get category. Now this is an accessor, right? This is an accessor method, but we could write a read-only property as well. You could write a read-only property for this, or you could write a method. I'm writing a method. And now we say if BMI, this is where we bring in our, okay, if it's less than 18, underweight, if it's less than 25, 30, okay. So if it's less than 18.5, I don't think we need to store that. And I also don't think we need to store this. In other words, we could just return that. And like we'll do with our string. So if BMI says BMI doesn't exist because we deleted it, so you could call calc BMI double BMI equals calc BMI. Just get that in scope. If underscore BMI category equals underweight, else if BMI is less than 25, category equals healthy weight. Else if BMI is less than 30, category is overweight, else category equals obese. And then return category. The takeaway, business logic goes in here. If statements, for loops, business rules go in there. And I made this longer because probably these could have been auto-implemented. Every time I don't think I need them, I'm like, well, wait a minute, maybe I could have used them. But that's okay. So that's the model. Next chapter, we'll be tying in databases, and that database tie-in will be at the model level, so we'll expand on this. But that's what's around the corner. Let's take a look at what we need to do next. Form ASP action is index, method is post. Let's make this a strong app model is BMI. And label ASP4 height. Class is form label. put type text ASP4 height value at viewBag dot height class form control from our controller viewBag fire that up and see what's breaking. Got an error. Or do we? There were build errors. Where are my build errors? Rebuild solution. Error list. This is the new one. Tells me there's build errors and then it won't tell me what they are. Wants me to, here's some warnings. Get category, capital G. I could just return. Let's close and reopen it. Sometimes Visual Studio can be cranky. The typer namespace could not be found. It's on BMI. Okay. It's interesting that that didn't show up in my error list, but here it is. BMI.cs. Cannot find ASP.NET Core. BMICS. Oh. I've seen that before. Was it Sam? That was like, I must have hit a hotkey and it put that in there for me. Someone in this class. It added a using statement. There we go. That's interesting. Now you know. Okay, well I've got my height going in as 0. So that's what I would expect. And close that, and close that, and close that, and close that. Let's continue on the view. I'm trying to do this fast so that you guys can get to work on the stuff that you're still working on. Almost done. Put this in a div. Close that div. Add another div. Close that. This is weight. And a button type submit. And just like I did on the other one, I'll put it in a div class of row. Div, does that work? No, I didn't think so. Div class of call 1, 2, 3, put my form inside of there. Control KD to format. Okay. And all I need left is my output. Class of text success at I'm pretty sure in the lab, like, you didn't have to display your answer as a 0 when it loaded. And I think the difference there, and I'd have to tinker with it, but I think the difference is if you don't load the BMI here, you can load it in your posts. HTTP post public I action result index. This accepts a BMI object called user BMI. View bag dot height equals user BMI height. View bag dot weight equals user BMI dot weight. Seems to be a common mistake of mine. Instead of view bag, it's view bat. View bag dot BMI equals user BMI dot calc BMI view bag dot category user BMI dot get category. And now we need to return a view with the user BMI object. Again, I didn't put my category up here. I want to see if that does break it since we're at a testing point. We could put that in a paragraph at view bag dot category. And the idea here is this category isn't set on the get, it's only set on the post. Okay, so my text category isn't there. I think this is height in inches. Uh, 75, I think, is my height in inches. 75 divided by 12. Yeah, about 6'3". And if I say I'm 200. Okay.
Severely underweight.
Severely underweight. It's all. I'm disappearing. No, what's happening is it's doing exactly what I told it to do. What I told it to do was wrong. I'm happy though. I'm happy because all I have to do is adjust my calculation, and that would get my BMI calculated correctly. And then this is obviously working. So it's working. It's doing what I told it to do. I just didn't instruct it properly. And so that's where I left off. Now, this BMI, if I want to clean this up because no one likes a good squiggly, what it's saying is that I could, instead of just this, I could just return, I could just go like this. I like it the way I did it better, but apparently Visual Studio doesn't. Oh. Else return obese. Okay, there we go. So now if I rebuild the solution, now those squigglies are gone. Build succeeded. And our calculator is working and our MPG is working. And like I did here, you don't need to show the answer 0. Kind of like what I just demonstrated. You don't need, like I didn't put my category in except for on the post. So you could get by with not doing BMI right here. And then that should still work. Cannot, well, and yeah, so then let's make that nullable. But you guys have done that in your lab. That's not the point of the demonstration. Right. All right. I'll stop it there. You guys can just keep on working where you left off.